but I'm going to talk about the Pollinator Project. I wear many hats with the work that I do, and I'm Pollinator Project hat on for this session. Fantastic. So the Pollinator Project you might be aware of. We're a small charity based in Guernsey, started in 2017 by a group of fantastic and enthusiastic people who really just wanted to help gardeners to make good decisions in their gardens for pollinating insects. We have a sister organisation in Jersey, the Guernsey Pollinator Project. We operate fairly separately and we work in different ways. So I'm really just talking about the Guernsey work, but we'll touch on what we're doing across the Channel Islands. And our four key themes are education, conservation, campaigning and research. And with the ultimate aim of turning the Channel Islands into a pollinator paradise, a place where our pollinators are thriving, and that we can really show the rest of the world what can be done to help insects. So I'll give you a little brief bit of inspiration about the education work that we do. We have a fantastic program where we go into primary schools every year, and we go into every primary school on Guernsey and we talk to the children about pollinators and why they're important. We have a theme each year, so we really want to make sure that children know that it's not just bees, but our different bees, our butterflies, our beetles and our moths. And what's fantastic is when you then sort of hear that trickling down from the children to the parents, and parents getting involved and talking about, I didn't realise that beetles were pollinators. So working with the children to really help spread that message. We have these guides that we produce, they're available on our website, and we also have an art competition every year with the children. So this year we had a gigantic moth made of many moths that all the children decorated themselves. Laura from the Pollinator Project is here and led the education project this year, so she can answer your questions about that. We also work on actual practical conservation methods. So we have pollinator patches where you can sow seed or create areas that are positive for pollinators. We have signs that people can get off us. We help promote different plant species that you could have in your garden, and we work with corporate sponsors as well to get people involved in bits of management and creating space for pollinators on the islands. And one of the things that we're really keen on is campaigning. We campaign really against pesticides, peat and plastic, but I'm going to particularly focus on the work that we do against pesticides for this talk. So back in 2019, we had a kind of vision that we could turn Guernsey into a completely pesticide-free island. That is the vision, continues to be the vision. And we started this process by having a public forum. So we invited all different stakeholders on Guernsey who might be interested in this or have voices in this, to test the water and see what people might think. Maybe people would think it was sort of completely insane and very radical. But we had really, really positive response from that. And so from that, we've just continued plowing forward. In 2021, we had a pesticide amnesty. This was a bank holiday weekend in the summer, and we said to people, come on down, you can bring pesticides that you're not using anymore, that you want to get rid of. Because I'm sure many of us, even if we don't really use pesticides, have got a bottle of something under the kitchen sink or in the garden shed, and you're kind of stuck with it. You don't really know what to do with it. So we said, bring your items down, and we planned this with Guernsey Waste, who are fantastic in helping with this. And they originally gave us sort of 2 of these little crates and said, okay, we can put it in there. And we were completely overwhelmed by what was bought. So we had 888 items brought into us over the bank holiday weekend. We had to turn people away because people were bringing so much stuff in. We sorted through all those items and did an inventory of it. And 51% of those pesticide products were unapproved. So things mainly that had been approved in the past and have now been removed from sale and are no longer considered safe for use. So this stuff, you know, these poisons are out there in people's homes, and you know, the concern is if we don't get them safely disposed of, people might use them, you know, without realising the risk. We've also got a fantastic collaboration with Guernsey Water. So Guernsey Water have a vested interest in this because obviously on an island, our water is a very precious resource. And what we don't want is pesticides getting into the water system. So Guernsey Water have had this campaign to try and encourage people to think about the fact that spraying pesticides in their garden is impacting our water sources. And one of our really fantastic milestones has been a ban on the sale of glyphosate for domestic use. That came in last year. And that was really due to the collaboration with Guernsey Water and the states and other stakeholders that we were able to do that. And I mention here specifically about domestic use, because what we're not here to do is to sort of tell farmers what they can and can't do. There are uses of pesticides that are important, and we need to think about food security and things like that. But the domestic space is somewhere where lots of people use pesticides completely unnecessarily. You can so easily go and buy things in the supermarket and then go and spray them in your garden, and most people don't even read what it says on the back of the thing. So that use is a real risk, and we know from data from Guernsey Water that we see spikes in pesticide use around bank holiday weekends, indicating that that is coming from domestic use. So it's an area that we really target. And the idea is to bring people on board with this, to help show people that this is a really positive thing for the island, and to continue that journey towards a pesticide-free Guernsey. And a real take-home message from this actually is that this is a process. Pesticide reduction or a pesticide ban doesn't happen overnight, and we are on a journey to try and reduce pesticides. Our little milestones here, so everything in red is stuff that we have done, stuff that we have achieved, and then in black is stuff that we would love to do, that is kind of part of our vision moving ahead. We actually, the first black one, an auditing process for professional users, that is now underway, and so we can get an idea of what people are using within the professional space, as well as the domestic space. And the other thing about this is that we don't want to come in and sort of and hit hard and sort of tell people what to do, but to use soft power to work with people and with the community to change hearts and minds about this, and to think about things like human health. I'm sure everyone in this room would understand an argument against using pesticides from an environmental perspective, but for a lot of people that isn't enough of a reason. So actually thinking about human health impacts and wider impacts, and crucially collaborating. So much of what we've achieved actually is due to the collaborations that we have on the island, and that's a really key part of it. So all of this great work that the Pollinator Project does leads to a really fascinating and exciting opportunity, because if we're going through this process of pesticide reduction, we could begin to understand what impact does that actually have on our pollinators. And we have a set of islands, and someone mentioned this earlier this morning. Islands are these perfect little microcosms of the real world, and they're like little snow globes. We can do stuff on islands, and we have edges, so we can actually sort of scientifically assess what's happening. So we have a set of 4 islands, and we have Guernsey where we're really focusing this pesticide reduction. And so I'm working with the University of Bristol to actually look at the ecological impact of that. And it's quite a complex thing. This isn't something we can just sort of count the bees and see what's happened to them. But to set out our kind of rough expectation, we know that pollinators, as many things are declining. And so we've had this decline in the past. And at the present time, we're not actually sure what exactly the status of pollinators on the Channel Islands are. We're collecting that data to build up that picture. And as we go through this pesticide reduction process, what we'd really hope we'll be able to show is a recovery of pollinators on the Channel Islands. And we would expect different outcomes on the different islands because we've got different processes happening, different things happening. We've got focus attention on Guernsey, but there will also be other things happening on the other islands. So we can use this setup, this unique setup of having this set of islands, to look at the before, after, and use the islands as control measures for each other. And this gives us a sense of the impact. So I'm going to talk you through the four main methods that we've been using to try and assess this. So first we're looking at the pollinator community as a whole. Then we're looking at bumblebee colony density as a specific measure of a particular species. And then we're looking at cascading impacts, so impacts that go onto the predators of pollinators, the bats, and also the parasitoids that infect our pollinator species. So our pollinator community, we are looking at, we have malaise traps that we set up across the 4 islands. And we've got fantastic volunteers, some of whom are in the room, who help to run these malaise traps. We put them out for a month in peak summer, and we collect a sample from that site. And this is what the sample looks like at the bottom here. We end up with this kind of pot of just loads and loads of insects. But what that enables us to do is to think about the whole community of pollinators rather than just kind of charismatic species. So we take that pot and we sort it in the lab, which I was doing with some masters and undergraduate students. It's sort of addictive, but also, you know, you're leaning over this thing full of ethanol and you get a little bit drunk sorting insects. But you can begin to see kind of breakdown of some of the different species and groups that we have. So these are just some of the major groups that we've sorted out. You end up with a whole pile of tiny, tiny little flies that are a bit of a nightmare. But what we will be doing with this work is be doing DNA analysis on it. So using the same methods that were described in the talk just before to look at all the different species that we're catching in there. And it's fantastic because a lot of those little fly species, which we just won't have any records for because people tend not to go out and look for those little tiny things. So from that data, we can build an idea of the kind of community composition and the trends over time. So these are examples from the UK. These are the UK trends in pollinating insects. And you can see here just building a trend that's showing what's happening over time and also highlighting what's happening to different species, which species are increasing, which are decreasing, and which are remaining fairly stable. And the other thing that we can do from this data is we can start to build a network, because we're not just interested in what species we have, but what is the pollination service that they provide to us. So from the samples, we can work out what pollinators we have. And then from the literature and from previous work, I've done various bits of work on plant pollinator networks, we can start to build this set of connections, which insects are visiting which plants on our island. And this is just an example of what an actual data set for that looks like. This is quite a famous plant pollinator network from Bristol. This is done by Jane Memmott, who's one of the collaborators on this project. And this is just showing 79 pollinator species and the plants that they visited at a site in Bristol. So we'd like to be able to start to build these for the Channel Islands. And then there's a couple of details in this that we'd like to look at. So some pollinators are what we call specialists. They visit just perhaps one species of plant or a very small group of plants. So something like solitary bees, the one highlighted in orange here. And then others are complete generalists. They'll visit anything. So we've got 2 flies over there that visit lots and lots of different plant species. And we expect that pesticide reduction would have a different impact on specialists compared to generalists because their feeding habits are very different. So we can actually use the networks to look at the different impacts on those different groups of species. The other thing that is a little bit of a challenge for us is migratory species. because lots of pollinators do migrate. Most people are familiar with butterflies migrating through, but even lots of hoverflies are migratory. And so if we have species that are migrants, they are maybe not going to be impacted at all by any pesticide reduction, because they might have just come from somewhere where there's pesticides. So we can compare the migrant species and what's happening with them to our local species that we know stay on the island all year round. And from that we can get a measure of the sort of impact that it's having on the two groups. Our second method is to look at bumblebee colony density. So this is focusing in on Bombus terrestris, the buff-tailed bumblebee. What we do is we go out and we look for the buff-tailed bumblebee on the different islands, catch them, and we take a tarsal clipping. So this is just taking a tiny, tiny little section of the foot. And then we will do DNA analysis on that. From that, we can work out the number of colonies that we have on the island. And the way that that works is, imagine that I went out and collected 100 samples, and I did the DNA analysis, and all 100 of those bees were sisters. Then that would tell me that there's only one colony within that area that I surveyed. But if I went out and I got 100 and none of them were sisters, then I would have at least 100 colonies in that area, and probably more. And because we're sampling in different locations, we can also triangulate to work out where we think most of the colonies are. So this will give us a really focused look at what's happening to a particular charismatic species. This is just some lovely photos from this summer on Sark. I had two fantastic interns, Maddie and Taliesin, who came and we surveyed in Sark. And this is just to demonstrate the size of that tarsal clipping. It's a really, really tiny little thing. And it was quite windy this day that we came to Sark. And sort of, we were so, these little tiny things, you're trying for them not to be blown away as you're putting them into the tube. But it's a good fun survey. The third thing we're doing is looking at the impacts on the predators. So looking at the bat species. So working with BTO and the Guernsey Biological Record Centre, we've got bat detectors at the same locations where we have the Malaise traps. So what we can then see is there increased bat activity, which would indicate that there's more food, more pollinators, and that there's this knock-on effect through the food chain. And the final method that we're looking at is the cascading impact on the parasitoids. So the parasitoids, this example here is a canopid fly which parasitizes bumblebees. So we might think of parasites as being kind of quite a negative thing, but they actually are a really good indicator of a healthy population. There has to be enough bumblebees around for there to be the parasites. So we will look at them, and we're catching them in the Malaise trap samples already so that we know that they're there. So that's our little summary of methods, and I just show you how this sort of fits in with our timeline. So far we've collected 4 years worth of baseline data using those different methods, and the plan is to keep collecting. And something that I'm really pleased and excited to tell you all today, especially because there are people in the room who have been involved in this, is that we've just secured £1 million worth of funding to carry on this work. So we'll actually be doing 4 more years worth of work dedicated to this. Which I'm absolutely thrilled about, having spent a lot of my time trying to get there. But yes, the plan is that we will have a big long-term data set, 7 to 8 years worth of data to show what's happening to pollinators on the Channel Islands. And what I'd really love is that if we can show that there is an impact, we can take that message further out and to help spread the word and to help other jurisdictions change their views on pesticides so that we can help pollinators.